Welcome to the Derek Loudermilk Show. Today's guest is Tom Lancaster. Tom Lancaster is a thought leader in adventure consciousness, and today we are going to look at different aspects of that. Something that you know that I love. We're going to talk about the joy of being alive, making big decisions, how to use adventure for your personal and spiritual growth, determining your highest values, and more, with plenty of good adventure stories thrown in. So without further ado, here is Tom Lancaster. I'm curious, I've had the experience of going and doing work on myself and then being excited for my friends and family to see a different me, to see an evolved me. I'm curious how you expect to be interacting with your family, country, whatever, as you go this new version of yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely looking forward to it, and what I'm experiencing, having been on the path, if you like, on the journey, is that the depth of my communication, the depth of my relationships generally has changed beyond recognition. And so it stands to reason that that the same could be expected with my family. But the thing with family is that, that's like the most deeply ingrained triggers to how you were as a kid, right? I'm writing a thing at the minute, like a workbook for rewiring beliefs, and one of the things I talk about, which I'm sure you'll appreciate, is changing context, and how important it is to change the context if you want to change the belief. And I talk about family, like, we've all had that experience where we go home and just suddenly we're 12 years old or 6 years old or whatever it is, and we're having the same fight with our sister, and we're, go back to just being this kid that needs looking after by mom. And so yeah, it'll be interesting to see who shows up, like what version of me shows up when I go back to the family home and I slip back into the family system. Not that there's anything wrong with the family system. Like, we have a great family.
I had this interesting experience a few years back after I became a dad, and we were living. I think we were living in Croatia, and we came back, and I felt like a peer with my father for the first time. It was like I no longer needed him to be this sort of anchor in my life. Like, I was now that for my family. And so as we met, as we started hanging out, it was different in a way, because now I was a dad and we could share in this sort of, like, we're both in charge of a family. We had this head of household vibe, and it was cool I still also want him to be like somewhat responsible for me, because it's a very comforting, safe feeling. But being a peer was a really interesting surprise.
Yeah, it's like a role change. Yeah, one of the things that I'm looking forward to on this trip back home is possibly for the first time to have a very real conversation with my dad. That we're both excited to have, about some of the challenges that we have both had when I was a kid, or when he was younger in the 90s, and just it's really fascinating to me to see how my different approach to that conversation generates a different result. And when I come from a place of, I want to understand your experience, I want to know how it was for you, like what were the struggles that you faced, rather than where I've tried to come from before, which is, these are all of the reasons that I had a shitty time, which is not empathic. It's not, it's all about me. And it's not gone well in the past, understandably, right? Because it's been an attack. Whereas now we're both excited for this possibility to understand each other better.
Yeah, you said, being on this path, you had experienced a depth of communication. I was wondering if you could share some of the specifics that have opened that up for you.
Well, I think that's it. It's one of the things that we don't learn through school and, general life upbringing is to put the other person first in conversation, to come from a place of I'm listening so that I can understand, not so that I can speak, not so that I can piggyback off what you've said into my experience. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I still do that. I'm still human, but it's just having that awareness and that consciousness of asking questions first. And when you speak, asking more questions, which creates that much deeper connection, and it creates a safe space for vulnerability, a safe space for openness, and it just allows for like a much deeper and more real connection. And what I found in my life is, I spent a lot of my childhood being kind of afraid to speak my truth because it wasn't safe to do so. I got bullied as a kid, and I was separated from my parents when I went to boarding school, and a number of other things I created a reality out of that where it wasn't safe for me to express who I am. And so what I'm learning, and I'm still very much, on that path of learning, I'm definitely not a closed book, and it never will be. But I spent most of my young adulthood tiptoeing around people and trying to please them, and only sharing the parts of me that I felt were acceptable, or that wouldn't upset you, or that wouldn't trigger you. Whereas when we create that container for a conversation, it's safe for me to just say my truth and trust that you can be responsible for yourself and your reaction, and do it in a loving and kind way. But one of my favorite quotes is from, her name's escaped me, the book Untamed. I can't remember her name, but the quote is, "Your job in life is to disappoint as many people as it takes to not disappoint yourself."
That's a good one.
And I feel like it's not like directly related to what I'm talking about, but when you develop the ability to hold a conversation in a kind of sacred container, then it's safe for me to disappoint you and communicate that it's because I need to not disappoint myself. Right? I would love to do this thing that you've proposed, but I need to look after my health and it doesn't serve me. And I mean, we've had that example between the two of us. You're producing this book and you invited me to be a part of it, and I was really excited about it. And then when I sat down, I was like, actually, this is not going to serve me right now. And in the past, I probably would have just done it and I'd have done a shitty job
Mm-hmm.
because I'd made that commitment, and therefore I was unprepared to let you down or upset you or, renege on my commitment. But that wouldn't have been a benefit for either of us, really, because we'd probably have ended up in the same place where my content's not going to be in your book. Because I would have, you know what I mean? I would have rushed through it, and I would have like got something done, and you'd have read through it and you'd go, oh, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. And it would have been a kind of waste of everyone's time, or it would have gone, whatever, who knows how it would have gone. What I'm saying is, for me personally, having developed the toolkit, the internal toolkit of my own self-regulation, is that I feel much more confident in expressing my truth and trusting that whoever I'm dealing with can handle that truth, and that I don't need to kind of hold them in that and protect them from me.
Mm-hmm. I have a thought that I want to just place to come back to, which is this thing you brought up, which is the dance between commitment, how we stay with what we said we're going to do, and being able to change our mind and go with what's needed in the moment. That's there's a tension there, which I think would be interesting to look at, but I'd love to hear some specifics about how you acquired this ability to not have to take care of someone's experience in conversation.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's kind of a big nebulous topic, right? For me, it comes down to understanding myself and doing the work to really understand my own triggers and my own belief system, and there's hundreds of exercises. I mean, I've been working with coaches for the last several years, and I've also been coaching. And one of the things I love about coaching is that I don't know if you experience this, but I find my clients show up needing to work through the exact same stuff that I need to work through.
Yeah.
and I mean, the reason for that is that we're all humans and we all have the same stuff to work through, right? We all were taught one way or another through childhood to hate ourselves to some degree. We're all taught that we're not good enough, that we shouldn't wear that thing or say that thing or stop making so much noise, or, whatever it is. Just, our parents, even though they love us, they contain the raw, soul that is the 4-year-old child. And the 4-year-old child internalizes that soul is not good enough. And so for me, this work is about coming back and connecting to that soul and teaching it that it's safe. It's safe to be itself. It's safe to feel everything that it feels, and it's safe to express what it's feeling. Because when I feel safe to express, my experience is that other people around me feel safe to receive. I don't know if that gave you any specifics, but
no, I'm just thinking of my own son, who's 4, almost 5, and he's also very, very loud, which it's hard on it's hard on everyone's nervous systems. But there's this when you with any kid, they can tell when you just want to like not receive their full expression, and it's very frustrating. And then when you are, it's just this like connection of the whole world drops away, and then they're just like, their face lights up and they're so in it. Yeah. Um, are there any particular practices that you're thinking of right now that we might be able to share with the audience that could help?
Yeah, I mean, one of the most powerful exercises that I've ever done um, is really simple. It's just a timeline of your life. So you take, ideally you write it with like a pen and paper, and take a few pieces of paper and like stick them together so you have like this big long
Yeah.
landscape sheet, and take a few days or a week or however long it takes to just get really detailed. I was born, I moved house, my grandma died, I got selected for the school football team, we went on holiday to this place and I sat on a turtle, like whatever it is, just like, you know what I mean? Like as detailed as you can, with all the quote unquote bad stuff and all the quote unquote good stuff. And then but with no kind of emotion, no story, no nothing, just like the facts. These things happened. And then on the next line down, what was the feeling that that event created? You know, when grandma died, did you feel responsible? Did you feel lonely? Did you feel abandoned? Like, you know, for me, when I went to boarding school, I felt rejected by my parents. I felt abandoned. I felt unloved. And so you go through for all of these events. What was the feeling that that created? Then what was the belief that was installed by that feeling? So to go back to the boarding school example, I felt abandoned and rejected, and actually it was the belief was that I was unlovable. That there was the belief was that there was something fundamentally wrong with me. Otherwise, why would my parents send me away? Right? As a kid, I didn't understand that they wanted the best education for me, and you know all of this stuff. And then the fourth line is like, well, what's a new belief that you want to have instead? So in this example, the new belief is that I am lovable. The new belief is that I am valuable, that I do have stuff to offer, that my presence brings joy and happiness. And seems like a very simple thing, but the impact of just doing that one exercise is so profound, because what you notice when you go through, even just when you do the first line, before you get into the kind of deeper stuff, is you start to see the trend and you see the belief building of all the places where you've learned that you're a worthless human, that you have nothing to offer, and how that story, which most of us have been telling ourselves for as long as we can remember, right? That one way or another, we're a piece of shit that has nothing of value. But when you see like, oh, these are all of the places in my life where this story was installed, just that on its own allows a huge release. And
Yeah,
from,
it's like, of course, someone with these experiences would build something like that.
yeah, because you step outside and you look at your, you know, if I was looking at you and you had my life, I'd be like, yeah, you've been through some shit. You know, you've seen things, you've had traumas, you've had experiences, and I can totally get that you would feel alone and abandoned and like no one wants to play with you, and whatever else it is that you're feeling. Um, um, so yeah, that was definitely a key moment in my, I call my work, or one of the ways I talk about my work is that I help people on the journey home to themselves. Um, I like you, I use a lot of adventure in the work that I do, but one of the things that I've learned about adventure is that when we go out into the world and we have an experience and it's difficult and it's challenging and uncomfortable and maybe we feel like we're not going to make it, it's when we come back that we find what we were looking for. It's when we come back home and we see how the world around us is different somehow. We are different. We come back from an adventure a different person.
I love that. And that's exactly what we started this conversation talking about, you returning back home as a new version. Let's tell a quick adventure story. Let's mix in some really interesting ones. And you said something about when you're uncomfortable. So I would love if you could share one of your adventure moments when you were just really uncomfortable with the situation.
Well, just 2 weeks ago, so I do a lot of rock climbing,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the things that I love about rock climbing is, for the most part, you get to, like, one of my beliefs is that growth happens when we're just like outside our comfort zone, right? Stephen Kotler talks about the 4% zone, right? When you're 4%, when the difficulty is 4% higher than the skill, that's where you get into flow, and that's where you learn, and that's where, you lose. Suddenly you realize hours have gone by, and and climbing, I find, is a very easy way to do that, because of the way it's graded. You can be like, well, I am reliable to climb a 510A climb, or a 6A climb, depending on where you are in the world. And I know that if I try a 6B or a 10B, then it's going to challenge me, but I'm still going to be safe. But I know if I go to a 513, then I'm going to be, from 510 to 513, I know it's going to be probably a disaster that's likely going to be dangerous. And so it's very easy to create that just outside the comfort zone experience.
Yeah.
And sometimes you get it wrong. And I wouldn't say I got it wrong on this particular trip. We went, a friend of mine was really excited to climb this mountain called Yak Peak, which is on the Coquihalla Highway between Vancouver and the interior of BC. And it's this amazing face. It's like a kind of giant skate ramp that just like scoops up directly from the highway, and it just gets steeper and steeper and steeper up to the top.
Oh, interesting.
It's quite striking from the highway. And so he was kind of like super keen to climb it. And so we did a bit of research and found a route that was, 5.9, all the way up, which is well within my grade. And so we set off, and it was he hadn't done a lot of multi-pitch climbing before. But it was my first alpine climb, and I hadn't quite realized the difference between alpine climbing, which is like much higher up and above the snow line, and kind of just regular climbing down here.
What is the difference?
Well, the difference is that because that mountain spends 6 months of the year under snow and ice, it has a lot more like freeze thaw action on it, which means that the quality of the rock
breaks up the rock,
more sketchy. So it like breaks up the rock, so it's all kind of crumbly. And what I didn't anticipate was that half the holds that I grabbed hold of just came off in my hands.
Oh, geez.
And there were places where it was very hard where we had to like travel a long distance without, being above any protection that we had, in terms of the rope. And it was a lot more of an ordeal than I had bargained for. Because, so we have the Chief here, which is a 700-meter rock face that's like, it literally just like stands over Squamish and like guards over us here. And it's a big day to climb. The whole thing is a big day, but the rock is like absolutely solid, and the routes are all like really clearly marked. And there's, there's pictures of every pitch, and it's like turn left at this tree and like traverse across, and then find when you're in the, it's much like, it's much more choose your own adventure. And you have to figure out the way. And so figure out the way. And am I freezing?
Just cut out for just a second.
Let me backtrack a little bit.
Start back with choose your own adventure.
Yeah, so when you're in the Alpine, there's like, you don't have the detailed route description and the clear pictures, because the routes are much less traveled, right? So you have to kind of choose your own adventure. You have to figure out your own way, and sometimes you go over here and you're like, oh no, this isn't going to work, and you have to go back. And so that combination of shitty rock like crumbling all around you, of having to figure out where you are and where you're going, and the not knowing of, am I on the path that I selected up this mountain, or have I gone wrong? It just makes things that much more intense. And
and so it sounds like you were in charge because you have more experience than your friend, so you were sort of responsible for both of you.
Yeah. So the other thing is, like, when you're climbing, the way that you do it, you start from the ground, and you're climbing a big mountain, so there's no rope above you. And so when you're climbing equally matched, you're both tied onto the opposite ends of the rope. And I would climb up a rope length and putting in like bit for a short distance. And then you would come up, and then you'd do another rope length, and we'd zigzag, swapping leads up the mountain. But but basically I did all of the leading, and it's much more exhausting because you're finding the route, you're looking for the places to put the protection, you're the one that's above the gear, and so you have that, like, if you fall, it's more serious. And so there's just no kind of rest. So kind of that whole combination of things was just added up to a feeling of, shit, I've bitten off more than I can chew here, and this could potentially end up in a pretty serious situation.
And were you sort of mid-face when you fully realized that? Or
Yeah, well, because like I said, this particular climb, it starts off at a very low angle, and it's like a kind of parabolic curve. It just gets steeper and steeper and steeper. And so the first 6 pitches or so were very gentle, very easy. And then as it got steeper and steeper, the rock got more and more crappy, and the wind got stronger and stronger, and I got more and more tired, and every hold that came off in my hand, I got more and more sketched out, and just the whole thing just like, just kind of built up and built up. And, in the world of alpine climbing, what we did is really nothing. It's like, it's like an easy day out.
Okay.
But the thing I love about adventure is that it's so personal, right? And for me on this day, it was more than I was, it wasn't more than I could handle, because we did it, and for the most part we were safe. But from an emotional perspective, from a mental perspective, it was like it felt too much at the time, at certain times. And what well, the first thing was when we got to the top, that feeling of just like joy to be alive was so intense. And just, the truth is we hadn't come very close to death at all. But when we have these experiences where we feel close to death, it makes life smell sweeter, taste better. And so that was the first thing, was we got to the top and it was just like, oh my God, I'm so glad to be alive. I'm so tired and I'm so just like frazzled. And then, we hiked down. It was 2.5 hours just to hike down in the dark, and then a couple of hours to drive back to Vancouver. And
yeah,
on the experience, I talked to friends of mine who are more experienced alpine climbers, who were kind of like, "Oh, that's cute," to my experience. I had that real sense of having grown, and now I feel like the next time I go into the alpine climbing, it's not gonna be a shock. I'm gonna be mentally prepared for crappy rock, for high winds, for sketchy route finding, for traversing under boulder fields that look like they're going to collapse on top of your head. All of this stuff that was the first time I experienced it all at once, and being the responsible one. The next time it's not going to have such a heavy burden on me, because I've been there before and I've come through it. And I think the other part of it is, I know the other part of it is for me to witness myself holding it together through that experience and getting us through it, being with that fear and having the capability to, to breathe and gather myself and stick with it, and not just descend into complete fear response. Like, I get to bring that with me into my life. I get to bring that with me into, to go back to what we were saying earlier, like when I wrote to you and said, I'm not going to do this piece for your book, like there's fear involved in that, right? Because how are you going to respond, right? And what I've discovered through my adventures is like the times when I'm really challenged, like that comes back with me, and that's now encoded into me, that I can deal with adversity. I can be in a tough situation and I can survive. And if we don't need to kind of push ourselves to like absolute extremes, right? Doing alpine climbing is not for everyone, but everyone has the capability to push themselves into a situation where they feel uncomfortable, where to them it feels like there's no way through. And again, climbing is a great example, right? If I take someone to the gym, and I've had this so many times, to the climbing gym that has like mats and everything's all safe, but they've never done it before, what happens almost every time is we put the harness on and they're all excited, and I don't know, we show them how to tie the knot into the rope, and then they start climbing and they get 4 feet off the ground and they freeze because it's a new situation and they don't know that the rope is going to hold them, right? I've told them that the rope can hold a minibus, right? That it's never, but they haven't experienced that. And so one of the things that you do when you're teaching someone to climb is you have them go up 3 or 4 feet and then sit back in the rope so that they can get that trust. But that is often, for a lot of people, that's the most terrifying thing that they've ever done. And so even just that experience can be transformational for someone, because it teaches us the difference between perceived risk and real risk.
Yeah. You know, your story of being with your fear as you climb this wall and going through that, you know, to me that speaks to one of the parts of the identity of an adventurer, right? We are leading the way. We are okay putting ourselves out there. We're okay making mistakes in front of other people. Just recently I was sitting around the campfire with some people and it was time to do a song share, and I'm not really much of a singer, but nobody wanted to go first. And it was just this like clear, oh, I'm the one who goes first. Like, I'm an adventurer, so I get to go first. I'm probably just as scared as everyone else, but part of my identity is going first, leading the way. And then everybody, you know, and I screwed up. I forgot the words, what I was going to say, and I got sweaty and embarrassed. And then it made it okay for everybody else to screw up after me. But you know, sitting around a camp, it's such a low actual risk situation.
But it's not, though, because as far as our internal systems are concerned, as far as our ego is concerned, if you make a fool of yourself and get ostracized by your group, right, especially around a campfire, right, the most tribal of settings, right, you get kicked out from the group and you die, right? You get eaten by a saber-toothed tiger or whatever, and that coding is still in us. And so it's like, when you think about it, it's a very low risk, but actually we perceive risk is with maximum consequence, which is, at the very least, we're going to be kicked out of the group. And with that, there's a high chance that we'll end up not surviving. So it's actually the same thing.
Did you ever think about, on the wall, turning back? Was that an option?
Yeah, I mean, it's always on your mind. But again, one of the things with that kind of particularly climbing and mountain adventures is that turning back is a big decision, because you often just can't retreat down the same route that you've gone up. You know, if the wall is overhanging, for example, then you can't rappel down because you're just going to end up dangling in space. But on a kind of more, I guess, I don't know, on a different level, retreating from the mountains often means leaving gear behind, and the gear is not cheap. And so, yeah, so if you need to, you know, if you're 300, 400, 500 meters up a face and you need to retreat, like that could cost you $1,000.
Yep.
Because you have to leave multiple bits of 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 your gear in the rock to actually enable you to do the rappel and recover the rope. Um, so so retreat can become a very expensive game, and it also can become a very dangerous game. Um, and so yeah, while that thought of I can't do this, I'm not good enough, I need to turn around, is always there. Um, as it is in almost everything that we do, whether it's me turning up to be on your podcast or giving a speech or writing a book or serving a client or whatever it is. Like we all have we all have that loop that runs, that I'm just not good enough to do this. I'm not sure where I'm going with this really, but it's I guess what I'm saying is we always have the option to not go through the fear, always. But there is always a cost to it. And this point of that gear up on the mountain is now becoming apparent to me, because whenever we bump up against our fear and we retreat, there is a big cost, because the thing that we want is on the other side of the fear. And the fear is our conditioning, is our survival mechanism that wants us to stay the same. And so the cost of staying comfortable, the cost of not going through that fear, is that we never get to where we want to be. We never get to the top of whatever the mountain is, the metaphorical mountain. You know, the freedom, the fulfillment, the joy, the happiness, the job, the relationship, the whatever it is.
When you're reminding me of one of my favorite yoga teachers. He's been on the podcast as well, Les Leventhal. And when I would be in his class, he would say, you know, who are you dedicating this practice to? And then there was moments in the practice where he said, you could stop this pose. I know it's really hard. It's like painful right now, but you know, think about what you dedicated this practice to and don't bail. Like if you bail now, you're going to bail on somebody else later. And so whatever you like, this is your time to practice the strength of doing what you said you were going to do and not bailing, so that the rest of your life, you don't have to bail when it's hard or when you're fearful. And it was like, you know, you just got to hold it for 20 more seconds. How hard could it really be? But there was tremendous strength that I found from being like, if I can hold a pose for 20 seconds, I can do anything.
Yeah, totally. Because it does, it ripples out everywhere. One of the things in my life right now, I'm working with a chiropractor, and I mean, I'm working with a number of different people, but one of the things that has come to light for me recently is that my sympathetic nervous system is in like constant overdrive. And like, I'm always in a rush to do everything. And like, I mean, I feel very present in this conversation right now, but if I put on a yoga video, I'll do 10 minutes of it. And then I'm like, oh, how much longer have we got? And like, when I'm in my car and like I drive a manual and I'm like in a rush to get into third gear and fourth gear and fifth gear. So anyway, so we're working on helping my parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest system, come up to par. And she's given me this ridiculous pose to stand in, which is like, it's called the hummingbird, and it's like you have to arch your back and like spread your wings behind and look up and bend your knees, and kind of like stretches all of the, well, because when we're in fight or flight, when we're in high alert, we kind of like, we curl up, right? We're ready to fight, we're ready to run. And that's kind of how I've been my whole life. So it's stretching all of that stuff out. And it's amazing how like how powerful the reaction that I have to that pose is, and how stressful my body finds it to be in this pose that's stimulating the restfulness.
It's stressful for you to rest.
Yeah, because I'm so, and it's something that's actually kind of, it's really altering the way that I look at my whole life and my whole, even my business model, which is based around adventure and the benefits of adventure, which a lot of the time comes down to adrenaline, which a lot of the time comes down to fight or flight, right? And and one of the things that I'm realizing about adventure is that, adrenaline, stress, cortisol are really good tools if they're used effectively. But when we are seeking out stress to avoid stress, we're on a path to burnout, even though it feels like a different stress. And for me, for most of my life, it felt like a release, like a runaway. But what I'm realizing now is there's a big element of addiction to stress, addiction to that fight or flight response. And when I consciously remove that and focus on breath, on meditation, on this stupid pose that my chiropractor has given me, that creates a stress response in me because it's so unpracticed. Even though I've been doing yoga for years and I've been meditating for years, I'm realizing that there's another level of allowing my system to recalibrate, which feels really powerful, but it's also kind of like, it's a bit like being up on that mountain. And it's like, I've been preaching this message and like, is that message valid anymore? Like, fuck, is my whole kind of like belief system crumbling underneath me? But it's not. It's just a new piece, right? It's a new depth that I'm stepping into. But it feels like my world is collapsing around me.
Oh,
like,
wow.
But what it is it's a breakthrough that's coming. It's a breakthrough that's happening for me right now. And what's on the other side of this breakthrough is awesome. But I have to be with, I have to be more with my commitment to myself than I am my commitment to my fear and my story of how things have always gone. And it's frightening. It's like my body is like, no, this is wrong. You need to be ready to go. We got to go and like, And so my chiropractor actually banned me from adrenaline, which also puts me in a state of high stress. But I'm funny. Like, yeah, I get it. It's like, yeah, I need to kind of just come home to myself a little bit.
How long do you have to?
It's undetermined.
Undetermined.
I
want to circle back right now to the commitment versus being able to change your mind or listen to your intuition as something changes, situation changes or belief changes. I think it's really important, and something that I see people talking about bailing, like people often bail on a commitment when they don't necessarily need to. It's just it's like the integrity piece, but with themselves. Like I never actually believed that I was going to do that anyway, so so I just committed to it, but I knew that I wasn't going to do it, and so I let myself bail. And there's power in just doing whatever you say you're going to do, no matter how hard it is, to prove that you're just going to believe your own self, what you're telling yourself or other people. So you can build that trust. And I think for people then that like I became a very stickler of like holding myself accountable and other people accountable. I would get upset when people bailed on me. Well, we also need to be able to reassess and change our minds. Like if you really should have gone back down the mountain, like if you really should get out,
Mm-hmm.
then that should be okay too. So could you talk a little bit about your understanding of this interplay between commitment versus allowing change?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a tightrope, right? Um, because integrity integrity starts with yourself, like you alluded to. And um and yeah, so if I commit to something knowing that I'm going to bail, then I'm not in integrity with myself and I'm not in integrity with you. And that creates dissonance in me, and that's going to have this whole ripple effect that goes through my whole life, right? Where I don't trust what I say, you don't trust what I say, and and it blocks connection, right? It blocks meaningful relationship. Um, and yeah, if we use the mountain example, potentially it blocks life, right? I mean, you continue on into the storm, there's a high chance that you might not come back. And um, I think so. One of the things that I think into this is the idea of priorities. And for me, my number one priority is myself, and then I have my work and my family and my friends. I don't have a spouse, but my spouse would be up in the number two position. And the reason why they're ordered that way is because if I'm not serving myself, I can't be there for anyone else. And so I think it's very important to, well, first of all, in an ideal world, one would only commit to things that they know that they can follow through on, right? That would be the ideal. And yes, it might get tough, and yes, it might get uncomfortable, but we're in it, and we're gonna see it through, and that's gonna lead to the best result. Um, and at the same time, life is messy, and when so the important piece in this whole conversation for me is if I realize that I'm heading down a path that is not going to serve me, it's in everyone's best interest to turn around, for me to turn around. Even though that might be challenging and that might let people down and it might whatever, ultimately it's for everyone's benefit. And but at the same time, that's not like a hall pass to just say yes to everything, knowing that I'm not going to show up. Right? I still have a very high value on only saying yes to things that I feel aligned with. And then I think there's also a distinction between this is getting hard and this no longer serves.
Do you have an example that we haven't talked about yet from your life that where you realized the path didn't serve you?
Yeah, so I I went to India in 2016 to do yoga teacher training. And while I was there, I um, I hurt my back, um, and had to sit out most of the like physical part of the training.
Hmm.
Um, but when the training was complete, I went to Goa, um, and um, was looking for a massage to try and help with my back. And this one of the guys selling stuff on the beach said, "Oh, I know a guy. He'll do you a great massage." And I was like, "Excuse me, what?" And then I was like, "Well, whatever. I'm in Goa. Whatever, whatever, whatever happens in Goa stays in Goa." And so I went and had this most magical experience of something that I'd never encountered at the time, um, called Watsu. I don't know if you're familiar with it. Um, Water shiatsu. It's like a combination of massage and yoga in a heated pool and meditation, and it's really an otherworldly experience.
I
And
happen to know Michael Watsu.
oh, really? Um, there we go, small world. Um, and I ended up spending most of my week in Goa just hanging out with this guy in the pool. And um, and I had one of those moments where I was like, okay, this is this is what I'm supposed to do, right? I'd gone to India to do yoga teacher training, but then as a result of that, I had discovered Watsu, and I was like, this, and it was the only thing, because I've had back problems my entire life, and this actually helped and made a difference where physio and chiropractors and osteopaths and blah 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 blah
Hmm.
had not made any difference. And so I then kind of took this on, and I came back to London and I found a teacher, and um, went went deep into it. And I ended up working at um, a spa in London, one of the in Piccadilly Circus, like really like top level fancy spa,
Hmm.
and one of the only places that has a Watsu pool, um, in the whole of London. So I ended up working there. It was where my teacher had his practice, and I ended up working there with him. And it was magic. I was having, some really profound sessions with clients, and people were giving me some great feedback, and I was really enjoying it. Um, and but there was something that just wasn't quite right in the relationship with me and the teacher. And it started to kind of, I don't know, like resentment started to creep in. And, um, I felt like he was exploiting me and not paying me what I deserved. And he felt like I was kind of grabbing more than I deserved because I was still learning. And there was just kind of a clash
Hmm.
there. And um, and it was a very hard decision, but I decided to come down off that mountain. I decided that this right here, right now, doesn't serve me anymore, because I would have liked to have done it full time, but that wouldn't have paid me, on the agreement that we had, that wouldn't have paid me the money that I needed to pay my rent. And it wasn't working to do it around my other work. I was working in film at the time. And so I made a decision to let it go. And, um, and I still have, um, some questions around that.
So I
Well,
want to ask you about when you came back from your time on the mountain, when you have integrated that into your identity, how do these, that's maybe a little change or a big change, but could you speak to how these risks or changing, I guess what I'm really asking is some of these adventure moments or some of these decisions that have sort of changed your identity, the way that you look at yourself, because I'm interested in the process by which we leave old identities behind and build new ones.
so what's the question?
What's the question? All right, let's try that again. Maybe it's not a good question. Um, Totally different question.
I'm sure there's a great question in there. I just
There
wasn't.
is, it'll come out if it needs to. Have you noticed an effect on creativity from adventure?
Yeah, I, I I don't think it's like a direct effect. Um, Wait, There's two things. One is that when we have these experiences that that change our identity, that change our relationship to ourselves. Um, when I come back changed from an adventure, I know myself a little bit deeper. I I know myself a little bit better. I'm I'm more able, as I said, to kind of be with fear and still show up as myself. And that definitely has an impact on creativity. Um, because, a lot of what gets in the way of creativity is fear. Is this thing that I'm creating any good? And so I think there's an effect that adventure has on that, and kind of like, doesn't matter if it is any good or not. It's the process. It doesn't matter if you get to the summit. It's the process of getting there is where the value is. And the other piece of it is that one of the big things for me, particularly when I spend time alone in nature, is that all of the noise and the clutter starts to fall away. And and so when I'm alone in nature so I just over the summer I spent 2 weeks just sitting on a beach by a lake on my own with no one else around. And and it was a very conscious decision to not do anything dangerous, to not even go on any hikes, not do anything stimulating, just almost like a kind of solo Vipassana retreat,
Yeah.
just to be with myself. Um, and so it was a 2 week trip, of which 10 days I was in the same location. And while I was there, like, I didn't even bring any music or any books. All I brought with me was food and a journal. And what came out of me in those 2 weeks, um, certainly to my mind, is some of the most profound thoughts that I've had. Um, and it's it's a weird thing. Like, when I was there, journaling, meditating, resting, eating, like, all of these things were easy and they just flowed. And there was no, like, I didn't have an alarm clock. I didn't have a schedule. I didn't have, you know, accountability. everything happened as it needed to happen. I would wake up when I woke up, and I would make breakfast, and I would meditate, and I would just feel inspired, and I'd write some stuff about my experience. And what I found was that, and what I found this time, and what I find every time I create this kind of experience for myself, is that it's not me that's being creative. Something comes through me when I create the space for it. And so this 2-week trip was the first time I've spent that long on my own in the wild. And one of the things that I wrote at the end of one of my entries was, I'm starting to think about what I'm writing, so it's time to stop.
That's an interesting awareness.
Because it was just coming. It was just happening. Like my hand was just moving. And often I'd write 4 or 5 pages. And then I'd kind of wake up and I'd be like, wait, what? Huh? And I'd read back through and I'm like, whoa, what is this stuff? Who wrote this?
Was it coherent?
Yeah, like coherent and like profound, and things that I'd been kind of wrestling with. So I have this theory, or this approach towards adventure consciousness, and it's kind of a hard thing to describe. And I'd kind of, over the course of years, made various different attempts to like put it into writing, like what is adventure consciousness? And then it just happened. It just like just came out of me on this trip. And I came back and I transcribed my journal, and I took that entry and I just went poof onto my website. This is adventure consciousness. And it wasn't like I hadn't set out to write a thing about it. That's just time. And then another time I was like scribbling away, and I found that I was writing out I didn't even realize it at the time, but what I was writing was the basis for an 8-week program about a system for rewiring beliefs, which I think I mentioned earlier. And so, yeah, so your question was, does adventure impact creativity? And 100% yes, it does, because what gets in the way of creativity is thinking. And
that's profound. Thank you for sharing. Super cool. Yeah. And it's, it's no easy thing to carve out. Okay, here's 2 weeks. And then when you're there, you're like, I could go for a walk. I could like be active in my engagement with nature around me. I could, pick things to observe and study. And there's some work to creating that space and enough room to, be able to channel. So yeah, I acknowledge you for that. It's not always easy. I think the last topic that I want to touch on is, as adventurers, we develop this, tolerance for risk, or we have a relationship with risk, whether it's real or imagined, whether it's standing up first at the song circle in the campfire or leading the climb. And I'm just curious if there are risks you've taken in your life. How do I know what to phrase this? Because sort of like where you knew you had to take a big chance, it was like an opportunity in front of you, but you're like, ooh, that feels like a big leap or a big chance for me. But because I am capable of taking on risky things, because I know myself to some degree, I can do it. Like, what has it enabled you to do, like to take a big step or chance? Love to hear about that.
Hmm. What comes to mind for me is my move to Vancouver. Um, and this could be a little bit circuitous, but for me, intuition is an important thing to talk about here. Um, so my intuition was telling me for a full 15 years that I needed to move to Vancouver.
Whoa.
And, but my fear prevented me from taking that risk, right? From uprooting my life. And well, it's weird because in that, over the course of 15 years, I moved towns and I moved countries even. I went from London, I spent 2 years working in the Middle East in Qatar. But that was following an opportunity. Whereas moving to Vancouver was like a step into the void. It was like, I don't know anything about this place. I don't have the right to work there. You know, there was a lot of fear around this, but this voice inside me was just like, when are you going to listen? You've got to go to Vancouver. And it got louder and louder and my life got shittier and shittier the longer I didn't listen to it. And eventually the universe, God, spirit, source, whatever you want to call it, made it easy for me by lining up the end of a relationship, the end of a job, money in the bank, an idea of a change in career that I wanted to make. Like all of these things kind of just all happened at once. And so I took the leap and I came to Vancouver and I went back to school to study user experience design. And again, it was a little bit like the Watsu thing. Like I came and I started getting engrossed in the world of design and user experience. And I was like, this is awesome. This is what I'm here to do. I mean, I've had that experience a number of times in my life. And what I've come to realize is that when I'm having that experience, it's simply I'm experiencing something new, and new things light me up. Anyway, so I had this experience of like, oh my God, this is what I'm supposed to do. And I mean, it wasn't at all what I was supposed to do. But when I look back from here, the reason why I had, because the moment that I got to Canada was when I really started to discover myself, when I really started to find out who I am. And since I've been here, I've met some of the people that I have the deepest relationships with that I've ever had. I've discovered my actual purpose, which is to help people find themselves through adventure. And it was really the start of even though my yoga teacher training was in 2016 and I started yoga in 2014, it was really the start of my healing journey. And what I put that down to is the change of context. So to come back to your original question, like uprooting everything, leaving my family behind, traveling halfway across the world on the basis of, I don't know, feels right, was a big risk. And I had some money in the bank, but I definitely didn't have enough to last me as long as I ended up needing to last without any money, and it got messy, and relationships suffered, and there was significant challenge along the way. But the result of submitting to my intuition and just being like, okay, well, I'm going to allow this to happen, has been profound beyond words. Like I said to you at the beginning of this conversation, like I am an entirely different human to the one who last left the UK. And it's going to be fascinating to go back home for Christmas and see what that experience is going to be like. But one of the learnings from this whole experience that I continue to learn every day is that when my intuition wants me to do something, I just need to do it. It might not make sense. It might be terrifying. It might seem dangerous. It might fly in the face of everything that I've built and created till now. But what I'm repeatedly shown over and over and over and over again is that when I listen to that voice, when I don't listen to the fear and the reason and the logic and this doesn't make sense and I can't afford it and all of those voices that show up, when I listen to that voice, and I distinguish between the two, like intuition doesn't make a big song and dance. It doesn't, like, there's no threats or like, there's no excitement. It's just like intuition speaks to me in a very kind of authoritative and calm voice. That you're going to do this. You're going to move to Vancouver. Have you done it yet? Whereas the ego, the survival mechanism, the fear, all of that, it speaks in a very emotional tone. It's like either, you got to do this or you're going to die. Or it's like, you can't do this because you're going to die. Or, do you know what I mean? It's like there's a threat involved, or there's like an urgency, or there's a panic.
I'm surprised to hear you say there's.
And so what I'm.
Oh, sorry. I'm surprised to hear you say there's not excitement.
Well, there is excitement about following the intuition, but I don't know. For me, it's the actual intuition, the voice, the instruction to do the thing is just very to the point. It's very calm. I can then get excited about doing that thing.
Okay. I see that.
So there was a huge amount of excitement about coming to Vancouver. There was a huge amount of excitement about going and climbing this mountain. There was a huge amount of excitement about going and spending 2 weeks on my own in the wilderness for the first time. And there was a lot of fear. And like those two things, I think, are part of the ego. Neither of them are bad. Neither of them are good. It's a part of this experience of being human. But I guess what I'm getting at is if we just follow the excitement, right, underneath that, our intuition might be saying no. But we're getting swept away. Possibility. And by this, if we just hear, underneath that, our intuition might be saying yes.
Do you have something in your intuition right now that has become apparent for you? Like, what's the most recent?
Uh, the
intuition
most
voice?
the most recent thing for me is hiring a bunch of people onto my team.
Mm.
Um, I've recently taken on a social media team and a business manager, and um, and there's a lot of fear in that, and there's a lot of I'm not ready. I can barely run this business by myself. How can I run a business with a whole team? Like there's all of that going on. But my intuition is very clear that this is a required step for the next stage of my evolution. Um, and so I'm just, I'm just
Are you excited?
standing aside. I'm super excited. And, and the process that I've gone through to hire this person, the business manager, particularly, like the social team is run by Garrison, a mutual friend of ours.
Yeah.
And I know him and I trust him, and like that's all good. But with Sophie, the business manager, I've never met her before, and I spoke to her once, and I didn't speak to anyone else, and my intuition said this is the person. Um, so I just went for it.
Yeah.
And I had the whole conversation in my head and with other people, like, oh, I should interview 5 people, and blah, I like, what if this, like, this feels good, but what if it doesn't? What if it,
It's too easy.
it's too easy, right? But that's the thing about learning to listen to intuition. I don't know if you've experienced this, but life can be really easy if we don't get in the way. And the and it's tricky to learn to distinguish between the two, to distinguish between the voice of fear or the voice of unbridled excitement versus the much quieter voice of intuition. But yeah, I guess what I'm saying is the more I listen to that intuition and I don't fight it, I don't resist it, the easier my life gets. And it's only when I resist the pull,
Yeah.
either because I'm committed to something over here or because I'm scared of going over there, it's when I get into that resistance of like where the universe is pulling me, that's when life gets really sticky, and that's when I get frustrated, and that's when balls start getting dropped, and things start to come off track. And as soon as I just like breathe, and I'm like, wait, okay, tune in. What's the path here? Oh, it's this, clearly. And I've been in my fear, or I've been overcommitted, or I've been whatever it is. Um, and then so we're then back to this idea of commitment versus integrity versus whatever. It's like that tightrope, that tricky path to navigate becomes very simple when we know to listen to our intuition. And it comes down to when my intuition is telling me that I need to let someone down, well, that's it. I need to let them down. In a loving and kind and thoughtful way, because it doesn't ultimately serve them, and it doesn't serve me to continue in that direction when I need to go in that direction.
Yeah, this is powerful stuff, and I just want to sort of highlight for maybe myself, but for everyone listening, how easy it can be. Like you feel like everything, your good luck just never ends when you are able to do that. When you listen to the intuition and then you just let it follow through and flow and all these things. Like you can experience weeks on end where it's just like the person calls you at the right time, the money comes in, the opportunity, and you're like, it's it feels so abundant just to have everything working out for you as you need it.
But then we shut it down, right? When we have these experiences, and I'm sure everybody who's listening has had that experience where everything's in flow and it's all happening, but then we get all up in our head about it and we're like, this is too easy, and we shut it down. Like almost deliberately, almost consciously, we're like, no, this is all going too well. This is a bad sign. I'm gonna go and do something else, right? Which is a fear response, right? It's a fear of possibility. And I do it. I'm sure you do it. But the practice is to just how much, like with my writing when I was on the beach, like as soon as I started to think, time to stop.
Mm. Yeah, what I love about that is like sometimes you could do this in the gym too. Like when you hit the best part of your workout and you're only halfway done, but you want to lock in that experience of like that perfect execution or whatever, like you can stop when you know that it's just gonna, like the rest isn't going to be as good, because it's like practicing, experiencing the perfection the way you want it,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mm. Is there anything we haven't touched on as far as adventure, what you're excited about in your work, that you want to mention or that you think is important, a concept for the audience that you want to share?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, one of the core aspects of adventure, like one of the key features that makes someone an adventurer, is a desire to make the unknown known. And one of the things that I talk about in my work, and one of the premises of adventure consciousness, is that adventure and spirituality are the same thing. Adventure is a spiritual practice, and spirituality is an adventure. And we all, as humans, we want to achieve more. We want to earn more. We want to have better relationships. We want more fulfillment. We want more satisfaction. We want more fun, more happiness, more joy. But a lot of the time, getting those things is conditional on stuff out there, outside of me. And a lot of the time, I want the promotion. I want the girl. I want to be able to play the saxophone. I mean, that's a great example from my life. I've wanted to play the saxophone for years. I've done exactly zero about learning the saxophone. Right? I have not been prepared to do the work of spending the money on buying a saxophone, hiring a teacher, and doing the practice, right? I just haven't been prepared to do that in order to get the thing that I want. But that's how most of us live our lives. It's like, oh, one day I'd love to be a CEO, or one day I'd love to have kids, or one day this, one day that. But we value our comfort more than we value making the unknown known. And making the unknown known is a scary thing to do because we don't know what's out there. And But that curiosity, that like, I wonder what's over there. When we can tap into that and just live our life from that place, like, what if the opposite was true? What if I wasn't afraid? What if around that corner there is a pot of gold? Like, if we live our life from that place of curiosity, then all the kind of story and fear and doubt and pain and suffering softens, because we're setting out not knowing what we might find, and we might find something great, or we might find another question, but either way we win. And it kind of loosens the rigidity that we have. You know, we're wired for structure and boxes to put things in. But when we open ourselves up to curiosity, to exploration, to trying something that we know is going to fail. You know, one of the kind of the reframes that I use with my clients is, well, what if you make failure the goal? Right? You're concerned that you're going to try this thing and it's not going to work. Well, make it not work. Go out there with the goal of failing, because then there's only two things that can happen. Either it fails, in which case you've succeeded in your goal, or it succeeds, in which case you've changed your paradigm. And so, you know, whatever it is, if it's a coach who's looking for clients, like, how many people can you get to say no to you in the next month? Right? Because in all of those no's, you're going to get a yes. And it takes the fear away. Like, if my goal, if I'm working with you and my goal is no, I can make my proposal $250,000. I can make my proposal $250 million. And it doesn't matter, right? Because I want you to say no. But in that process, I become a person who has made a $250 million offer. And so then the next time, you know, I mean, 250 million is probably a little bit of an extreme example, but
some people would really want that just because they want the best.
Yeah. And if you're looking for $250 million clients, I suggest you go to Qatar and look for them. They love nothing more than the most expensive thing that exists. But that's an aside. Yeah, when you make failure the goal, when you make no the desired answer, the possibility for learning in that space is huge. And it's a kind of, it's a shortcut to like bypassing the fear. Like, what's the result that I'm scared of? Okay, well, let's make that the goal. You know, and it applies anywhere. You're in a bar. I'm going to get turned down by 10 women tonight. And then it becomes fun, right? It becomes playful. You've released your attachment to the result that you want. And when we release our attachment to the thing we want, how much more likely are we to get it? A lot. And yeah, if you make your goal to get 10 phone numbers in a night, you're probably going to walk away with 0. But if you make your goal to get rejected 10 times, you'll probably walk away with 2 phone numbers.
I think this is a perfect invitation, perfect call to action for anyone listening that this feels exciting. This feels exciting for me. Pick a thing in your life that you want to get a no to, or that you want to shortcut, and see how it works. Would love to hear. And I'll think of something and share it as well that I tried, because I've done this before in some ways, but it's, you know, it's always a fun game to reframe it like that. Tom, yeah, that's perfect. And thank you for, you really brought a lot of your own experience here today. And I thank you for sharing. Um, this was fantastic. I feel like I really know you now. Um, so really appreciate you coming on. Would love to, what would you like to plug? What would you like to share? Where do you want to point people to learn more about you?
Yeah, well, I mean, thanks for having me on. This has been a, a really enjoyable conversation, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to spend this time with you, and get to know you as well. What I'm really excited about in my work is, I call it Wild Club, which is a 5-day retreat, if you will, that combines everything that I've learned through 25 years of adventure and 10 years of spiritual practice. And it's just a completely transformational event. And so if you're listening to this and you're in a space where you want to create a shift of some kind and you feel stuck or you don't know what that is, or and you're kind of inspired by what we've talked about, then maybe Wild Club is the thing to just change your context and just give you that kind of spiritual kick up the ass to create the change that you want to make in your life. That's what I'm up to, that I'm most excited about. But I have a bunch of different stuff going on, and the place to go is altitudeevolution.com. That's my website. Or you can find me on Instagram at climbing_Tom. Just shoot me an email, tom@altitudeevolution.com. I love talking to people. I love meeting new people. I love talking about adventure, consciousness, anything to do with this experience of being human. So yeah, I'd love to just have a conversation with anyone.
Love it. Tom, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.